The Hog's Die is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsdie.com.
The Hog's Die presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Hog's Die Presents It's Just Business, the show where we look at the sports industrial entertainment complex. I am joined by my ears and eyes team, as always, Steve and Rich. How you doing?
Oh, doing just great, but I really want to hear how Rich is doing because we haven't seen him in like 6 months.
That's right, traveling Rich.
Well, I am back. The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. I have returned from Maine. I was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, taking a tour of the Titanic victims and that whole thing in St. John's, New Brunswick, and Portland, Maine, which was uneventful. But Halifax by far was my favorite, and it was unexpectedly hot. I think it was in the low 90s one day. But then I said, well, my wife's like, well, maybe I can live here, until the tour director said, well, the high temperature in January.
And that was too much for her.
That ended that.
I'm surprised you didn't hit some beach weather or something. You're more of a historical and let's go see the sights guy, huh?
Yeah. Well, no, I did go see all the sights, but there are no beaches.
That's what I mean. You didn't go down like
lakes
Daytona Beach or something like that.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. Just real quick, some friends. That's normally what we do, but some friends talked us into this going north during the summer. We went to Bermuda last year, so I need the beach. But the good news is that I was in New Orleans a couple of weeks before that, and I was like, okay, New Orleans is like oppressive, and I wanted to get up to cooler temperatures, but it wasn't that much cooler in Maine.
I living down here in the Gulf South, I understand. It's feel like you're swimming through the atmosphere sometimes down here. I get it.
Did you?
I had the best clam chowder though that I've ever had in my. The best clam chowder. Interesting. The best fried chicken I've ever had in my life in New Orleans, and the best chowder that I had. I had the best chowder in Bar Harbor.
New England clam chowder. You can't beat that.
Did you not go to the beach in Maine?
No, man, they ain't had no beach. It's just, they have a beach, but it's like, like lakefront beach. We went to Acadia National, that whole type of thing. So no white sand, no blue water.
Well, by the way, Rich, we had
kind of trip.
A few laughs at your expense, on the Rich World Tour for the past 2 weeks. But we're glad you're
okay.
back. We're tired of Alex.
Well, the last day, we left out of Bayonne, New Jersey, so everybody on my cruise was from Jersey. So, that you can take that for what it's worth.
We probably have listeners in New Jersey, so I will just leave that alone.
My mother's people are from New Jersey.
Bayonne, New Jersey.
Can we please get into the show before we get ourselves in trouble?
All right, so we've got a number of topics today. First, we are going to start off with something that's a little bit topical. Just give you a little bit of a heads up. We're recording this a little earlier than we used to, so by the time you may be listening to this, some parts of this story may have advanced past our conversation. But I think that some of the big themes and big issues that we'll talk about will still be relevant even in a couple weeks' time. And that is legendary college coach Urban Meyer is now on paid administrative leave because, the charge is, or what the investigation is around, that he knowingly had a coach on his team that was, I guess, had been already charged or had charges of spousal abuse, and he covered it up. I might be missing some of the facts. Steve, fill me in.
Well, see, the funny thing was he was never charged and never arrested. There was a police report filed, and the police report that became public recently apparently errantly said he was arrested. He never was arrested. But here's the bottom line facts. This is Kyle Smith, Ohio State's wide receivers coach. His wife has alleged that she was serially abused by this man and has photos of injuries. She doesn't have photos of him directly hurting her. She has is photos of the aftermath. And she has alleged that he has done this. Smith, for himself, what Smith has said was that it was a physical relationship, inappropriately physical relationship, but anything he did was either in self-defense or to get himself out of the situation. He claims that he never hit her. Now, why this is relevant is that his now ex-wife told other coaches' wives what was happening, and including Urban Meyer's wife. This goes back to 2015. And so Urban Meyer's wife, and she has text messages that show this. Urban Meyer's wife eventually said, "I have to tell Urban." And she said, "You should tell Urban." If we fast forward to Big Ten Media Day just a couple weeks ago, the media asked Urban Meyer about this because the story started leaking. Urban said, "I don't know what you're talking about. As far as I know, nothing happened." Those weren't his words, but words to that effect. And so the question is, did Urban Meyer lie to the media when he said he didn't know, about any of this? And did Urban Meyer, if he did know, do anything wrong with regard to reporting requirements? And before I kick it to you guys, we'll just say that Title IX applies here. Title IX in the U.S. Code, which says, I'm no expert in Title IX here, but in essence, if bad things happen in public universities, sexual assault, domestic violence between students and staff members, the university has to report it up through appropriate channels. So the question is, did Urban know? And if he did know, did he report it properly? And the line to the media is kind of a secondary thing because he can't get fired for lying to the media. So that's the basics of it. So let's talk about the issues that have been set forth.
So, this is interesting. I don't know if this is if this goes to the realm of, I don't want to draw a correlation between Penn State, but the one thing I want to know is, was Urban Meyer trying, and there's been some reports of him trying to not necessarily cover it up, but work with the couple with counseling and trying to help them. Nobody's trying to excuse domestic violence. That's not what I'm saying. I think that if he had an obligation to report it, what do you say? I have a wide receivers coach whose wife says that he beats her. And as you mentioned, there was no arrest and no police report.
There was a police
and I'm not
report.
saying
there was no arrest. Yeah.
Oh, there was. Okay, there was a police report, right, but there was no arrest. So, all of that to say, I think this is a powder keg issue, and you have to go about it by the book. But at the same time, if I were in that situation, I don't know if I first learned that information, I don't know if the first thing that I would do is to go to my boss. I don't know if that would be the first thing I would do.
Well, the problem is you're not bound by Title IX. And Urban Meyer is bound by an employment contract. Here's the real see, what's really at issue here is about $38 million. Because that Urban Meyer has about that, I think the number is $38 million, has about that much left on his contract. And if he could be fired for cause, meaning he breached his contract in some way, he would lose the money. And so it's a lot of money at stake. And his contract will... I haven't read his contract. It's not public. But his contract says, among other things, you as a head coach of the Ohio State football program have to abide by all of the Title IX reporting requirements. So whether he should morally do it, report it or not is irrelevant. What's really relevant is, did he have information that triggered a Title IX reporting requirement? And if he did he report it? Now, what's really interesting is that the statement that Urban released late in the week of August, maybe August 2nd, August 3rd, Thursday or Friday, he very clearly and specifically said that he followed reporting requirements in 2015 with regard to the Kyle Smith matter. And so he's throwing his AD under the bus was by saying that. He's throwing Gene Smith, who's the athletic director at Ohio State, under the bus by saying, I told him. I followed. I did all report. I reported what I was supposed to report. It's on him. That is an effort for Urban to claim that he didn't breach his contract. And so that's what this is really about. Here's what Chris, you always have a good sense of these kind of things. I think what's most interesting is I think if you gave the Ohio State University truth serum collectively, I don't think they really want anything to happen to Urban Meyer. And I think they want to sweep this under the rug regardless of who beat who. That's what I think they want the end game to be.
Yeah, I don't think Ohio State's looking to lose its premier football coach. I don't think they opened up. I don't think they opened up June and July and said, it'd be great as a giant scandal where we would have to fire and fight, contractual obligations with our, one of two top football coaches in the entire world. So no, I think they would prefer this to go away in some capacity. The problem is, I think there's the legal element, there's the moral element. My take on this is, this is the hubris of these kinds of all-powerful guys who run their own kingdoms. And that's what connects it to Joe Paterno. That's what connects it to the college basketball guys, is they really think that they're above the law because in many ways they're treated that way. Now, the law may not see that, but their everyday life is they're treated, they're coddled, they're worshipped, they're given the golden, keys to the golden kingdom thrown at them. In many cases, they don't live by the rest of the laws, policies, or norms of the university system. They certainly aren't treated like a rhetoric professor or a physics professor, right? Which in some level, theoretically, they aren't that dissimilar. So the hubris takes over, and they think these things won't apply to them, and they don't follow the due diligence that you need to do when you run a large program or run any large piece of an organization, and that it always ends up tripping them up. And where the smart move would have been if he was truly cared about protecting his empire, and didn't let his eyes off the ball, is he would have followed the letter of the law here in pure self-preservation. I'm not even making it moralistic. He's going to let his kingdom crumble because he thought he was above the law.
Well, and let's also be said that as we record this, the Ohio State is undergoing an investigation to determine whether he did just that. And as we record this, we don't know whether the conclusion is going to be he followed the law in his contract or not. Now, Rich, I think you're in the best position of any of us to talk about this because you said on the show that you're a principal at a high school. If elementary. Okay. Elementary. If you had allegations from the spouse of a teacher come to you, what would you do?
Perfect. So I'm so glad you brought this up because this happened to me this year. I had a teacher came to me, and the way I found out about it was that she was abusing alcohol and she was drinking. It turned out we terminated her because she was drinking at work. But the backstory of it was that she was being abused by her husband. She actually texted me a picture of her with a black eye from a hospital bed. So when she showed me the picture, it is so funny. Her husband called me that morning and said, "Well, such and such won't be at work today." I'm like, I know she won't be at work today because you kicked her ass. Not to make light of it, but my obligation is this, and this is a little different of a nuance. The primary issue was this person's substance abuse, so we have to go through offering them employee assistance program, going through that piece. As far as reporting to the police, that was an allegation. My husband, I didn't know. So with my job, I don't have any obligation for an adult, for a teacher to report any abuse. Now for a child, totally different. So that's to answer your question.
Because really, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, and I don't mean to make a lot of it, but let's forget about Title IX for a minute. Because that either it is or it isn't. With Title IX, he has to report it or not. But is the fact that this coach is allegedly beating his wife, is that Urban Meyer's problem? Did he really have a moral obligation to do something? He is running a football team. Are the off-duty misdeeds of his staff the problem of the university?
Chris, did you let me jump in real quick before, and that's a great question. And again, coming from to answer your question, I don't know, Steve, and you might be better with the law. For a child,
that's different.
Most definitely.
Yeah, there's federal and state laws that require that. Yeah,
right. For an adult, I don't know, because did he know whether does it come down to whether a crime was committed?
Because the thing is, let's say Mrs. Meyer came to Urban and, for the sake of the argument, and said she told him. What was supposed to happen from a moral perspective? Should he have called him in and said, "Okay, you're gone immediately"? Well, if that's the case, he might have fired him without cause. This man has. But Steve, I think it.
The only thing, and I kind of link this to the Paterno thing, is the only thing he probably should have done was such and such told me that this coach allegedly does this, and then wipe his hands of it, and then let it go.
That's exactly what he said he did.
Right. Well, we'll have to see with the investigations.
Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. Just like the Paterno thing, and, just like, and allegedly that part didn't happen. See, the thing is, if you just say, that someone on my staff has allegedly committed a crime, domestic violence is a crime, allegedly. And then let the legal process and let the university take it where it's going to go. But then to try to intervene and be, intervene and be, whatever.
Because
I don't know.
That's the thing. That's where the hubris comes in. These guys think that let's keep it in house. Let's keep it in the family. We don't want, and this is what sunk Paterno too. We don't want any black marks. We don't want any scandals. So we're even handling it above board, following due diligence, doing the right thing becomes secondary to the reputation of the program and the kingdom that they've built. So that's why they always try to keep the secrets in, keep it in the family.
Yeah, that's
what's going to sink him, and that's his mistake here. Now we'll see how the investigation plays out. Maybe they have him on the record a couple times following due diligence, and in that case, he's then he did the right thing by policy, and he'll be okay. But the instinct is program preservation above all else, and that's where they make these mistakes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But for wide receivers,
it's the program above.
I agree with you, Chris. But for a wide and Paterno, who was it? Who was that guy?
Jerry
Sandusky. He was a defensive coordinator.
Okay, no. I'm talking about the Patino thing. Didn't he go down for an athlete?
Rick Pitino.
He was a defensive coordinator, and then he stopped being that, he was associated with the program.
You're mixing up. You said Pitino. Rick Pitino's a coach at Louisville. Is that where you're going?
No. I know. Yeah. What I'm saying is he went down for the actions of a what position?
Who, Pitino or Paterno? You're losing me.
Patino.
Patino. That's we did a whole show on this.
Rick Pitino.
Patino. I know. It was an assistant coach. Assistant coaches that were the ones involved in the payment scandals. Yes.
I know what I'm saying. Paterno went down for Sandusky, defensive coordinator. All I'm saying is you want to keep it in house and you want to cover it up, but it would cost. And what's the collateral damage?
I mean, Chris, you said it exactly right. I mean, it's hubris, and it's the program above everything. And as a wide receivers coach, replaceable, of course. There's a zillion wide receivers coaches out there. That guy, Kyle Smith, is nothing special. I mean, sorry, Kyle, but you're not. There's a million people that could coach wide receivers at the Division I level. It's not going to make or break the Ohio State program, but I think those guys like Urban Meyer, we got to protect the program no matter what. And furthermore, I think that no matter what Urban did or didn't do, I think Ohio State will do everything it can to protect him and do absolutely everything it can to keep him employed, because I don't think they really care about domestic violence. I think they care about the money that Urban generates through a winning program. So I think what we'll probably see out of this is if they have to punish him, they'll suspend him for a couple games, say he did the wrong thing, and hopefully it goes away, which it will eventually, because something else awful will happen and we'll move on.
Yeah, especially if he's got even a semblance of a paper trail that they can, claim he filed it, and maybe he did, and that would be, then he did what he was supposed to do, and if he or they can prove that, then it is what it is.
If they can find somebody who's a scapegoat, who's not Urban Meyer and not Gene Smith, the athletic director, they'll figure out a way to blame it on that person, get rid of him.
So let's look at it a different way, though. Okay, let's just say Urban Meyer did everything right. What could the university legally, Steve, and what could they do? What could they do?
Well,
over allegations.
This is,
and no disrespect to the
yeah.
accuser.
This is a difficult question because we don't know what their employment contracts say. Because Kyle Smith has an employment contract, I don't know how far it goes with regard to personal conduct. He was never convicted of a crime, but it probably, these contracts most of the time have a clause in them that basically says, for lack of a better term, to put it in simple terms, if you embarrass the university, we can fire you. They usually have those kind of clauses in them, and assuming he has a clause like that in him, one could argue that, listen, you abused your wife, it's public, you're gone because you violated that clause. That's where they could go if they wanted to. Now, what's the right thing to do? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's tough. It's the Me Too age, it's tough. It's, the problem is the criminal standard, standard of proof is a whole lot higher than any other standard of proof. Beyond a reasonable doubt is very, very high. And a university, a league, even a civil suit in a civil court you just don't have those kind of standards. And so one could conclude that Kyle Smith beat his wife and still not be guilty of a crime.
And I think this is where Urban Meyer was, if things are truly incredibly not smart, you put the program in jeopardy, and not to belittle a wide receiver coach position, but you put the program in jeopardy for this. And again, being in a position where, as you mentioned earlier, where I have to make decisions on, there are things that I have to report. I have mandatory reporting duties in my job. And I'm always going to go by the book. I don't care who it is, what it is. I'm always going to go by the book, because you can't go wrong. You talk about Title IX as the book. You can't go wrong when you go by the book. For a wide receivers coach, really? No.
Well, I would suggest what they could have done. They could have put him on paid administrative leave pending investigation.
Well, that's the whole question. Yes. That's the whole question, because the
Good
wife,
point.
I didn't mention this earlier, but the wife claims that nobody from Ohio State ever talked to her. And I don't know, if Urban Meyer reported a domestic violence incident through whatever the Title IX chain is at Ohio State should have done an investigation. And if they did an investigation, there should have been a written report, and to include witness statements. And the first witness number one is the wife. And if they never talked to the wife, they didn't do a real investigation. That's just, I don't find it possible to accept that they did any sort of investigation if they did not speak to the accuser. And so in that regard, somebody, unless there is a report and this woman is just lying, somebody in the Ohio State University did not do the right thing.
And what I'm probably doing is dismiss. Look, we don't know. We don't know the relationship between Urban Meyer and his wide receivers coach. But what if he had done that? And to your point, Chris, which is a great one, had he done that, what was the worst that could have happened?
What was the worst that could have happened is he has to find another wide receivers coach who he could find, and they're a dime a dozen.
And have one uncomfortable press conference.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
And matter of fact, you wouldn't even have to get into
again,
details. You just say we dismissed him from the program for personal reasons, and that's the end of it. Period.
Yeah.
Period. Dot. The
Right.
end.
Yeah, well,
So we're going to move on. We'll probably come back to the story because I imagine this is not done. And I imagine that if it does get messy, then it's a real battle about whether they're going to pay him out the remainder of his contract or not. And that would be ripe for future discussions as we see that play out, if it does play out that way. So we'll be back on this story, I'm sure, as the college football season rumbles towards us. But we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the factors and issues and theories about why women's professional sports have not found a niche in the pro sports landscape, and then what that means for women athletes at large, and women's athletics. So we started off thinking about this as there really isn't a successful pro sports league for women, with the probable exception of women's tennis. Would probably be your best example of a successful women's pro sport. So we'll just kind of start bringing up some topics and sort of unpacking this discussion. So I'll tag it off to you guys. I have some thoughts, but I'll introduce it and step away.
Okay. The obvious dichotomy that comes up, and people have tweeted this to us at the Hog Side for some reason a few times, the WNBA. The WNBA salaries are a fraction of what the NBA makes. Like 10 years ago, the salary cap was less than $1 million per team in the WNBA. I don't know what it is now. It's probably more, but the salary cap in the NBA is, what is it, 150 million, 160 million? There's a large dichotomy. And, well, why? Why is there such a large dichotomy? Is it fair that women athletes don't get paid what male athletes do? And it all comes down to viewers. And this is what really got me thinking about this. The reason why women don't get paid more in the WNBA, and the reason why the purses aren't bigger in the LPGA, etc., is that people aren't watching. It's as simple as that. If people aren't watching, the TV contracts aren't rich, and the money doesn't trickle down to the athletes. That's why. Now, the why people aren't watching is what's fascinating to me. I mean, is it that we live in a male chauvinist culture? Is it, that men just don't want to watch women in sports? What is it? Because, again, I think you're right, Chris. Other than women's tennis, there really hasn't been a successful professional women's sports outlet. The WNBA may be the next most successful, and that would have been out of business years ago without the NBA propping it up.
I think that if you look at the two examples that you named, we talked about women's tennis, and we talked a little bit about women's soccer. Women's tennis is probably the better example of a male-female sport where the skill set is not as skewed as it is in other sports. So if you look at the skill set of the WNBA versus the NBA, there's a wide margin. If you look at women's tennis, I mean, Serena Williams could probably beat many male tennis players. I can't say all, but many. It would be competitive. That's something that you could market. But when you start looking at other sports, there's a tremendous drop off in the skill level, as opposed to their male, compared to their male counterparts. At least from what I see on TV.
So it's not so much that it's a male chauvinist thing, that men don't want to watch women's sports. It's more so that the game itself may not be quite as good because of the physical aspects of, the biology of males versus females. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying yes, and I'm saying if you really look at it and take the tennis argument even further, if you can go back to the golden age of tennis in the 80s, I mean, men and women's tennis was like, we look forward to Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert just as, let me speak for myself. I look forward to watching Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert just as much as I wanted to watch Yvonne Lindell. See, y'all know nothing about Yvonne Lindell. Y'all too young. Yvonne Lindell versus John McEnroe.
Chris is looking at
Remember?
This fool is like the check. Yeah, so I just think it has something to do more with maybe the skill set. And
like Serena Williams. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but she's almost 6 feet tall, correct? Isn't she very, very tall for a woman? Is she not?
I don't know about that.
I think you said it right then.
I don't know. I don't know her height. I'm not trying to.
She's a physical freak, like most high-level athletes.
Yeah, so she's enough of a. That's a better way to say it. She's enough of a physical freak that you're right. I mean, the game that she plays could be competitive. Looks the same, as men playing. In terms of how she moves, how she hits, etc. If you watch a WNBA game, there's no dunking. It's slower. The people are shorter. It's a different game entirely that I think many people don't find to be as entertaining.
I think a couple things. One, professional sports is free market, right? So, the money and the attention and all the things that brings, TV contracts, viewers, all that good stuff, is driven by what people want to watch. And the reality is that, and I'm not even prepared to call it male chauvinism, but men would prefer to watch men do sports. And not as many women care about sports at all. So you combine those things, and you're just talking about eyeballs in a free market entertainment choice type of way, and you see what rises to the top. So the other thing I'd say is I actually think we've seen a high level of elevation in women's athletics over the last 20 to 25, 30 years, but most of it is in amateur or government-supported or university-supported realms. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, Title IX basically flattens the playing field in college athletics, which has allowed that not only the talent to be developed, but allow there to actually be, sports being played. And also international competition, whether it's the Olympics or these other international bodies, which aren't pro leagues per se, but they operate much like them, means that things like volleyball, soccer, even more niche sports like women's hockey, they have outlets for the high level athletes to compete. Gymnastics, figure skating. There's no pro leagues in that because those kind of athletes, it makes sense for them to stay in the international competition because that's the infrastructure of the sport. The infrastructure of those sports are not professional. And so there's other outlets for the high-level female athletes, government-supported, subsidized. Yes, you can use all those words, but they don't have to go into pro sports in many of those at the elite level of those athletic competitions.
Well, first of all, there's been many attempts. There's been several attempts to start professional volleyball leagues and professional volleyball tours, and they've all basically fallen flat, including men's.
Right.
And we'll point out that women's gymnastics, which is really girls' gymnastics in the Olympics, is probably the most. I don't know the ratings, but it's certainly one of the most popular Summer Olympic sports. There's absolutely no market whatsoever for it on a professional level, and they've tried repeatedly over and over again. It just doesn't work. But again, the same can be said for the men. So part of that is just the nature of the sport.
Yeah, you win a gold medal is going to beat anything that they can, a construct of a professional league is going to give you in terms of reward and recognition.
But women's soccer, women's golf, softball, all of those sports, on the other hand, have an equivalent male sport that is dramatically more popular. And I have some ratings to show what I'm talking about here. This is, This is 2007 LPGA, which is the Ladies Professional Golf Association ratings. This in 2017. There is something called the Ricoh Women's British Open. Okay, so that's the Women's British Open, 1.1 million viewers. The Women's PGA Championship, 839,000 viewers. Just as an example. Now, the U.S. Open, the Men's U.S. Open here for 2018, which was just back in June, 5.1 million viewers, which was up from last year but down from a couple years ago. So the men's golf is more than 5 times the viewers that women's golf does, for example. And are women biologically predisposed to not be able to play golf as well as men? I guess you probably can't hit it as far, but it's, this ain't football, so why aren't more people watching the LPGA, for example?
I think it's 5 times more men give a crap about golf at all than women, right? Like it's sometimes, so it's like, true. It's not just do men watch it or not. It's that, that now you could say this is it is a social construct, and, there's all kinds of things wrapped up in it, but it's not, while athletics and sports are certainly, and increasingly so, that's what I'm saying, the trend line is actually going up. There are an audience, there's women that are into it, they're into watching it, but it pales in comparison, women liking sports than it does men liking sports. And that's just a pure numbers game.
I don't think it's a male chauvinist thing to say that. I think you're exactly right. It's certainly in the United States, at least, there's the simple fact is there's just more men who like to watch and play sports.
That choose it as their free time activity.
And look at how it's marketed. I mean, how often do you turn on the television and see like a great highlight of a women's sport happening? Like you don't. It's not, and not to say they don't occur. It's just that they're not. It's not
unless
marketed.
You're talking about the Women's World Cup. Basically never. Like the
Olympics,
top 10
Olympics, World Cup,
yeah,
and women's tennis. I mean, those are the high water marks.
The Sports Center top 10 every day, 9 out of 10 are men. At least.
Well, I just want to let the Hall Style listeners know, and I feel bad now because when I mentioned Yvonne Lindell and you guys didn't know anything about it, Chris was had a look on his face. He was very upset, like, who does this guy think he is? Like, I know Yvonne. So let me clarify for the record that Chris and I are probably around the same age, and we both remember Yvonne Lindell.
I remember Yvonne Lindell.
So let me apologize to our gracious host, Chris.
Why am I complaining about being young, I guess?
I remember Yvonne Lindell, too, just for the record.
I loved Yvonne Lindell. The 80s, I mean, I literally watched in women's tennis too. I watched full matches of Yvonne Lindell, Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe, Bjorn Borg, Chris Everett, Martina Navratilova. I watched all.
You were a tennis fan. I mean, fair enough.
I think ultimately, yes, I think we understand why these things don't garner the big bucks, the big eyeballs. There's lots of sports, societal reasons, free market capitalism reasons, but the long trend, is that women's athletics and the quality of women athletes is on the steady rise, and that lots of progress has been made in the last 20 years on most of these things, and even if there may not be a sports league about it, but I think kind of the same way we talked about the quality of a basketball game is less. I don't think you necessarily can say that about World Cup soccer. I think the quality of the game is probably fairly similar at that point. And even something like, it's never going to be the NHL, but women's hockey and women's lacrosse have become huge high school and college sports. Yeah. And you see, that's where you see the gains.
Yeah. Well, so what would you guys say? I mean, we haven't really prepared for it, but what would you guys, just off the top of your head, say is probably the most lucrative or most marketed and marketable professional women's
It's
sport?
without a doubt tennis.
It's got to be tennis.
Without a doubt tennis. Yeah.
Tennis? What about, well, you're right. I was, at first, I think there was some momentum at one point with like women's boxing and MMA, but I think
but women's MMA is actually a good example of a pro sport. That may actually be your number two. You think of Ronda Rousey,
that or the LPGA, maybe one of the two. Yeah, because the UFC is just generally smaller. in terms of audience and events and all that than golf. No, I think that's actually a great example because Ronda Rousey was the biggest UFC star in the world for a period of time before she got knocked out twice, at least. And there are others, and Muhammad Ali's daughter, I forget what her name is, Layla Ali. Yeah,
Layla.
Yeah, she was a very well-known boxer, women's boxer. So there are sports that it has crossed over. It's just it's crossing over at a very, very, very slow rate. And I really what started my thought process on this when we were kicking around topic ideas was, why is it taking so long for women's sports compared to men's sports? And the answer, I think, is just societal preference. Like you said, Chris, I mean, the fact of the matter is, call us male chauvinists if you want, but more men, like in the United States, like sports than women. There are many female sports fans and very knowledgeable, but I think there's much less in number.
I'm gonna tell you, I actually thought of one of my favorite female sports to watch is women's track and field.
Yeah, see, that's another good, but there's not a professional market for that. It's all an amateur market.
Either gender.
A professional market for that.
Yeah.
Either gender. Oh, yeah, track and field. But it's so funny you bring that up, Chris. It's like we watch it at Olympics, but it doesn't really carry over. I mean, you might be able to find, you're flipping through the channels, the men's, indoor track championships. And that, I mean,
but there's a difference between, so I think part of it is there's pro sports leagues that, are professional athletes, they're funded by the league, they are capitalistic endeavors, with some government support and all that. So those exist. But for something like gymnastics or track and field, there is an international infrastructure for competition that can go in, that where athletes, male and female for this matter, in this example, can compete till they can't physically. They can compete till they're 30 or 41 or whatever, because there's an international infrastructure, whether it's some private funding, a lot of state funding, but there's an infrastructure that provides the same thing that a sports league would. So there doesn't need to be necessarily a pro, quote unquote, pro version of that sport, because there's an international competition that holds that infrastructure.
Well, and in the case of gymnastics, you're washed up if you're 17.
Yeah.
There's just a very limited window. There's a very limited window to this.
Well, what's interesting is, and it's so funny because I don't know if you guys pay attention, but Ronda Rousey has a commercial endorsement with Twizzler, candy,
I've seen it,
the licorice, and that's probably like a big deal for her, or for like women, in terms of like marketing. Every now and then you might see a gymnast with a commercial,
usually right after the Olympics.
But that's probably like that's like what they're in it. Like, if I could just get like an that's like a big deal.
I think she's probably the most well-known female athlete in the world.
Who's
Ronda
that?
Rousey.
No, Serena
You're
Williams.
right. I'm so, but she may be number 2 behind Serena.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, I think the WNBA is obvious. I just don't think the game is as entertaining as the men's game. You've got like women's softball has never caught on, as compared to baseball. Is it a game thing? Maybe so. It's an interesting topic. There's not a good answer here. We just wanted to kick this around and see what everybody thought.
My cousin played for she played football for the DC Divas, which is like a subsidiary of the, the rest of, she actually played professional, what they say is professional tackle football, and it was pretty physical.
Is it really?
So that's just,
they see, the thing is, does anybody even go to those games?
No, nobody.
Right.
No.
And that's a minor league. I mean, that's not the equivalent of the NFL. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
And certainly the elite female athletes are not going into tackle football, But it's a good point nonetheless. Shall we move on?
We'll move on to our final topic, which is that NASCAR, a topic that we've looked at a little bit over the sort of spring and early summer, and their possible future and how they operate their business. Well, the person who's in charge of running the business of NASCAR, one Brian France, was recently arrested in the Hamptons in Long Island, New York, where the rich and powerful play in the summer. At about 7:30 p.m. and arrested for a DUI, he blew a .18, which, if you know anything about blood alcohol breathalyzer tests, is a Herculean blow right there.
That's half dead.
Yeah, that's not on the borderline. And, looked like he had a satchel full of Oxycontin or Oxycodone or whatever, one of those opiate painkillers. And so he is now on indefinite leave of absence, and some controversy for old Brian France as he was partying a little too hard in the Hamptons.
I will predict, first of all, this plays into every NASCAR stereotype imaginable. Number one. I mean, it really does. I mean,
alcohol and hillbilly heroin.
Yeah, exactly right. I will predict now that NASCAR fans utterly won't care a single bit. It doesn't matter at all. I don't think that NASCAR fans care about the senior leader of NASCAR. They care about the drivers and the team, the teams first and foremost. So the fact that this guy blew a point, twice the legal limit and was carrying Oxycontin, I don't think matters a single bit. This is a case of rich hillbilly behaving badly. That won't have an effect on him or anything. Sadly, at the end of the day.
Although I didn't have time to look into his background, but he lives in Manhattan and summers in the Hamptons. That doesn't seem like the NASCAR profile. Yeah,
that's not a hillbilly.
Then he's the head hillbilly, but he's not really a hillbilly.
No,
and I don't want to insult NASCAR fans. We're making light. We're making light.
No, I think you're insulting hillbillies, but we don't.
There's nothing wrong with it.
That term hillbilly can be insulting.
Here's the point. Here's the point. NASCAR has an undeniable southern and rural demographic. Okay, NASCAR is much more popular in South Carolina than it is in Seattle, or that it is in New York City. And so there is a definite southern demographic to it, and that's why we're making light of hillbilly. I don't mean it like that. But my point with this is just a case of rich guy behaving badly, and ultimately it's not going to matter a single bit to anybody. He may get suspended, from NASCAR leadership for a while and blah, blah, blah. Who cares? He'll be back.
Well, there's two things. There's two kind of semi-interesting things to this story outside of the fact that this guy knows how to party. Is that, one, this does have some implications for the NASCAR story that we have been kind of keeping our eye on, which is a potential sale. Right. And if they've got real problems at their upper-level leadership, it'd be kind of curious to see how this plays or doesn't play, or, to see what kind of future of NASCAR, the company, comes out of this, and, does this actually shake loose new leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So there's something interesting on that front to see if this has any effect. And in that case, it has a chance to have more of an effect than whether fans care. And then, to your point, Steve, NASCAR literally was born out of Prohibition, where they needed southeastern drivers who drove fast to run liquor from the southeast to northern cities. So NASCAR and the way they built and souped up the cars and the kind of Johnny race car mentality in the southeast was completely based on illegal alcohol sales. Anyone will tell you that, including Joe Gibbs, who's Joe Gibbs' father ran illegal booze as a guy who could drive fast. So
Joe's a southern guy too, by the way, himself.
Yeah, the entire history of the sport is seeped in moonshine and rum running and all kinds of things.
Like it's Dukes of Hazzard come to life, basically.
Yeah, when alcohol went legal again, they had to legitimize. They said, oh well, let's look at how we entertain people with this.
In terms of the business aspect of it, you can, that you mentioned, you can better believe that this guy, what's his name, Chris?
Brian France.
Brian France. You can best believe that the rest of the leadership of NASCAR and the owners of NASCAR are not going to let one Brian France stand in the way of a sale. They'll tell him to leave. They'll buy him out. They'll get rid of him. They'll stuff him in a closet. They'll go hire, the Sopranos to, bury him in a bridge. He will be gone, if it means protecting Brian France or selling the business. I can promise you and guarantee you that.
And just to continue to burst the bubble, he was in a Lexus. That's a very...
so he's not really a hillbilly at all.
Not my brand of car. Oh no.
This guy was not in a Ford in Atlanta. He was in.
He's giving the Lexus line a bad name.
So this is not a guy who was in Southern Georgia, in a Ford. This was a New York City guy who was in a Lexus. So yeah, burst the hillbilly bubble there a little bit.
The part that is a little bit more, if we're just going to lean totally into stereotypes here, a little bit more hillbilly, is that it looks like the spokesperson who's had to carry a lot of the water at NASCAR is Jim France, Brian France's uncle.
Pretty incestuous. Of course, we know that NASCAR is it's not a family.
Uncle Jim?
It's NASCAR is a little bit of a family business. It's privately owned. This is not a public company. The leadership of NASCAR has never been out in front like, Roger Goodell is out in front of the NFL and, whatnot. NASCAR pushes the product out front first, which is actually smart because when you have a problem like this, it doesn't matter. Because I think half the world, the country would probably cheer if Roger Goodell blew a .18 and got caught with Oxycodone. The world would cheer about that for the most part. But in this case, it's as long as Dale Jr. and company are doing okay, I think the fans will be fine. And the sport will be fine.
And there has been long rumors of his substance abuse problems. He's denied them, but in a 2009 book, Dirt Under the Asphalt, the writer alleged that he had been in treatment and then he had a long history. And this might be just the thing that NASCAR looks to oust him because he has also sort of been credited with their rise. And as we've talked about when we brought up NASCAR, the sort of return to the mean that they've gone through over the last couple years. So this may be NASCAR's opportunity to bring in new blood.
Like I said, they're going to call in Tony Soprano if Brian France is standing in the way of a sale. The only equivalent I can think of to this is the owner of the Colts, Jim Irsay, had or has a substance abuse problem and got caught with something more than alcohol.
Yeah, he got caught with opiates as well.
Okay, yeah, opiates. And the NFL slapped him on the wrist, suspended him for a couple games, whatever suspension means to an owner, and then they moved on, and that was it. So, again, you're not going to let an owner stand in the way of the product, ever, including NASCAR, including the NFL, including everybody. So, there you go. We thought we'd have some fun. It's not athletes behaving badly. It's business execs behaving badly.
Yeah, he's got a good mugshot, I have to say. He's got a nice smile still, but he's got a good Jim Blossom face.
I was going to say his smile's probably born from the chemicals that are in his body more than anything else.
And I'm sorry.
No, I was just giggling.
Well, I'm going to add a topic. We're going to go freestyle. Just very quickly. And this relates to the conversation that I and Steve collectively had with Jason Cole about the NFL Hall of Fame.
I don't remember the conversation, but go ahead.
On Twitter. It was just like 2 days
okay.
ago.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Rich. Start it off. I remember.
As my great-grandmother used to say, it's a sin before God that Joe Jacoby is not in the Hall of Fame. And one of the local radio personalities, Al Galdi, made a great tweet about how Bobby Beathard is in the Hall of Fame, but how he's struggling with Alzheimer's and he can't really, he has some impediments that isn't allowing him to enjoy it. And I think it's a travesty. I do understand the vetting process, but I'll just say that it is horrible if you know a person should be in the hall. Why make them wait? Now, I understand about waiting in line. I get it. and but it is the argument that was made, and this came from my conversation came from the Steve Zabin show this week where Jason Cole was on, and Steve Zabin made a great point when he said maybe you should open. They said it's only 5 guys. Maybe you should open it up to more guys early on now, and then it'll tail off. But I have to advocate for Joe Jacoby, and I just think it's bad that Bobby Beathard had to wait this.
I do remember this conversation, and for those of you who follow the Hogsty, you know that the Hogsty has done as much as we possibly can for Joe over the years, and Joe's been a great guest on our show twice, and it's really sad he didn't get in. But see, Jason Cole is one of the ones that believes Joe isn't good enough. You know, and what started the controversy was that I made a comment on the Hogside Twitter that said something like, if Jason believes that, Jason doesn't know what he's talking about. And he got his shorts a little bit twisted up over that. Although, to his credit, he was very professional about it. And we actually ended up having a pretty good conversation about it. And the bottom line is Jason Cole just doesn't think Joe's good enough. He thinks that there were other offensive linemen that were better than Joe, and it's entitled his opinion. We ought to save this for another topic for another show, but I actually think the whole voting process needs to change.
Yes, and Fred Smoot. I don't know if you guys tune into like local stuff, but Fred Smoot is gaining a lot of momentum. He's on 980 right now.
Well, there's a whole nother story to that. Yeah, Urban One owns 980
yeah,
now.
I know. Yeah. So Fred Smoot was saying, you know, and he's not the only one that said it, but no writer should ever vote for who should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
There was an essay by a sports writer, and it was endorsed by a couple other sports writers that was also carrying that water. That it makes no sense for sports writers to be making these decisions. I'll see if I can.
Yours truly has said that for years on the Hogsty.
Right. I mean, that's like, you know, Steve, you're a lawyer. That's like if a litigant determines whether you should have your license.
That happens. That's called people representing themselves pro se, and it rarely goes well because usually they're crazy.
So anyway, but that was my freestyle moment for the night. Take it away, Chris.
All right, well, we'll leave it right there. I mean, I obviously believe Joe Jacoby should be in the Hall of Fame, but I think sadly the Veterans Committee is going to be his last shot, and he's going to have to wait on that one. So we'll leave you with that depressing note, and we will call it a show. And you can always find us at #IJB or at the Hogsty Twitter account. And you can find me at ChrisLarry33. We like to banty show ideas and topics around there, so join in the fun. Steve, you can find Camping Out at the Hogsty account. And if you really follow the Hogsty account, you can guess which ones are Alex and which one's Steve. It's a nice parlor game to play at home. Rich, where can they find you?
Now that I'm back in the Eastern Time Zone, they can find me at DiscoQ5, DiscoQue5.
And by the way, you can really easily tell the tweets that are Alex's because he's the one with the terrible grammar.
That's the tell?
Yeah, that's bad spelling and terrible grammar.
All right.
And I'm an educator, and I did not know that when you travel to Canada, like Nova Scotia, it's a time change. So, you know, I don't know everything. So,
all right.
All right. Well, we will see you in 2 weeks' time. That's it for this session. Goodbye.
All right. Goodbye. Peace.